Welcome back to the floor of ILW 2951 for Crusader, Tumbril, and MISC Day here on the floor. My name is Paul, Berserker01, Batman Shelley, your humble host and space bartender at the Astropub, and your professor on Galactic Historian. Welcome back to the museum. Now, for those of you who've never been to these lore tours, these are where I go through the floor of any event and give a little bit of context for the ships and manufacturers that you can see on the floor. Now, this is not meant to be a extensive, detailed rundown of all of their lore. Some of this is third hand. I haven't done a ton of research for a lot of these, so I have some general notes that I've pulled up on my screen to talk about it. Especially with this day. This day is very big, so I expect this to be much longer than usual. But if you want more of that information, a little bit more detailed, up there's a link. That link will take you to their Galactic Historian playlist, which has a little bit more details of all of the lore of Star Citizen, including and especially Tumbril and Crusader, which I did a full breakdown of those companies with a little bit of it about their various products earlier, a couple of years ago. So make sure you check that out as well. Without further ado, let's get started with our look at Crusader Industries. So Crusader Industries was founded in 2799, and it was the result of a failed bid for political ambitions. The short story is August Dunlow was a middle-class kid on Angeli in the Croshaw system when the coup that killed the second-to-last Mezzer, with the rise of the last Mezzer, who killed his father, the second-to-last Mezzer, ended up killing his mom, gravely wounding his father. August's father eventually died of his wounds and left August an orphan. Then he was lucky enough to be scooped up off the streets, got an education, helped join and create the anti-Mezzer movement on Angeli, was nearly assassinated, was shuttled off to Xi'an space, then was brought back towards the end of the revolution to help overthrow the last Mezzer, and then tried to change the galaxy through politics, found it wasn't very effective, so he founded a ship company. It's a lot longer story. Go watch the video on it if you want to know more. But suffice it to say, Crusader's main purpose is not to make money, but it is to make money, but it's kind of like a fundraising effort. Their main focus is to sell their ships to make money that they can then put back into charities. Very little profits of Crusader Industries actually goes into profits. It either goes into maintaining what already exists, like their planet in the Stanton system, or helping to build and design new ships, or going to charities. And that specifically is why the Crusader Starlifter exists. Now, the Crusader Starlifter, let me look at my notes so I can have a full date of when this happened, first came about in 2814. Now, at the end of the Mezzer era, the Navy, Marines, and Army had discovered that they were really lacking in heavy lift and just general transport vehicles for ground forces. They were using converted civilian ships, the equivalent of what would eventually become like the Hull Bs and Hull Cs, I should say. Hull Bs and Cs, which were fragile, difficult to land, and hard to maneuver, especially in a battlefield. So there became a big push at the end of the 28th and into the early 29th century to revamp the Starlifter command and to revamp a lot of these ground transportation ships. One of those was the Crusader Hercules. Now, the Hercules was developed as a surprise, though Crusader had built large ships and starliners in the past. They hadn't really built any cargo vessels, just cruise ships. Well, they had built one, which was the Jupiter, which was a shuttle ship. It's a complicated story. Again, watch the video. But they were mostly known for their starliners, for their luxury star ships, essentially, the cruise ships of the verse. And so when the Navy heard that Crusader was going to give a pitch, they expected just a revamp of that. But instead, they found a brand new, bottom-up, bespoke ship for the Navy that was eventually chosen, and that became the M2. The M2 was very rugged, it had lots of armor, and it's designed to essentially be dropped off right in the front of the battlefield. Maybe just a little bit behind the battlefield, but it's designed to survive combat drops. Because the thing that the Army and the Navy had realized and the Marines, over hundreds of years of battles and data that they'd been collecting was that the lack of their inflexibility to drop ground troops, especially heavy vehicles like the Nova tank, directly into battles, cost hundreds, if not thousands, of lives because it became much harder to land forces, especially if you look at the infamous Battle of Idris, where it almost went entirely the opposite way if it weren't for Ivor Mezer's quick and cool command structure. So the Star Lifter was the beginning of this new stage of military deployment. But it was also quickly converted into other purposes, especially for delivering relief supplies all over the verse, because of it can carry heavy vehicles, it can also carry lots of cargo, and it's in a pressurized container. So, as a result, August Dunlow was very, very happy that they got picked because it was essentially the perfect storm for him. It was a ship that he built, that he sold, that he made money for, that then went into relief supplies for famines and refugees and floods, all these things, all over the verse. But it was also delivering those supplies all over the verse. So it was best of both worlds. And it's since then in the 2950s, because of some technology they developed for the Genesis Starliner, they eventually developed a way to kind of build bespoke or build custom ships really quickly. It's called the roll and go method that they've developed, which has eventually led to the C2 and the A2, which are just variants of the same ship with slight differences here and there, which was released in the 2940s. Now, the Tumbril Nova tank. Now, Tumbril has an interesting history. Tumbril was formed in the Centauri system. The two founders were a husband-wife team from Saisei, who grew up on Yar, which is a neighboring planet, it's kind of a desert planet, where a ground vehicle had basically saved the husband's mom's life with the help of his future wife. And they decided that, and they had loved tooling around with that thing, so when they reached a kind of a weird point in their lives, they decided that they were going to build their own company from the ground up, building ground vehicles, which was in a time period when everyone and their mother can tool around in the equivalent of a Honda Civic with 50 caliber machine guns on them and go much faster than it would be like a horse and buggy in the time of race cars. It didn't make a lot of sense. And as a result, they didn't sell very well. They did make some very, very good vehicles, especially the DX-20, which is the first one they made. And this is before the First Varn War. 25, the actual details here. 2536. Well long ago. But they didn't get a lot of sales. But when the First Varn War broke out, right next door, because Centauri it's got a jump point to the Devarin systems, the Devarin home system, the reality of war became very serious, and the UPE army was struggling because they couldn't just fly ships around everywhere they went. They needed some sort of ground transportation to help protect their troops on the front lines. So they gathered all of the available ground vehicles that were being sold in the civilian market and found the DX-20 was just amazing and really easy to convert for military use. Became one of the major factors of the victory in the First Devarin War, and possibly even playing a big role in the Battle of Idris. So the Navy or the Army and the Marines started buying lots and lots of Tumbril stuff, and Tumbril became super popular because as the veterans came home, they liked the ground vehicles, they bought their own civilian DX-20s, and Tumbril just soared as its own company for, life on the frontier, also just for funsies. It was a car company in an age of spaceships. Then came the second Tavaran War, and the Army needed kind of an updated DX-20. They needed something that could give them the equalizing punch they needed against the Tavaran. So they developed the Nova. The Nova tank is a main battle tank. It's a 3-person crew. It has it now has this is a Hurston Dynamics Slayer gun. Size 5 Slayer cannon. The original one, we don't know exactly which one it has, but this is a remodel that they released in the 2940s, Tumbril did, specifically as a way to counter the Vanduul threat, and has become still pretty popular. It's most famous for, remember the actual battle here, the Battle of the Korean Pass, or I'm sorry, it's called Koren Pass in 2605. Koren. I always say Korean, but I don't know if that's the way it's pronounced or not. Where a couple of Nova tanks held off an entire army of Tavaran for hours to help secure the victory there. And they're personally really fun to drive, so you ever get a chance to. Unfortunately, Tumbril eventually went bust and would eventually come back, hence the new Nova tank. But we'll talk about that story when we go to the Cyclone exhibit. So join me on that one. All right. Here we are. This is a very big haul, so I apologize ahead of time. But here we are with the Cyclone and Star Runner section. So when Tumbril went out of business, it simply died over time as interest waned. It eventually would come back because of an enthusiast who was very interested in the old Tumbril blend, had many DX-20s and original Tumbrils. I'd also like to say that the Tumbril didn't really die. It sort of petered out over time and eventually just closed its doors. The man was the name Terrence Naban. The Terrence Naban was famous for buying kind of distressed assets or just companies that are failing and turning them around. And because he was such a huge fan of Tumbril, he bought the rights to all the old Tumbril vehicles and then gave kind of new life to Tumbril Land Systems and re-releasing the Nova tank. But specifically, the first vehicle that he did wasn't a re-release of an old vehicle, but a new vehicle built in the same Tumbril style, which was the Cyclone. So the Cyclone is designed as the spiritual successor to the DX-20. It is a fast, fun, maneuverable vehicle that can hold, some of the more weaponed-up variants can hold 3 individuals. And it's rugged, it has low signature, does very well for what it's designed to do. And it is very much active in the UE military. Almost all of the different variants are. There's combat variants like the TR and the MT, exploration variants, racing variants, the base variants that can actually hold cargo, so on and so forth. Then we have the Crusader Mercury Star Runner. Now, unfortunately, there's not a lot of lore here, but it's probably that the Star Runner was first developed in the aftermath of the Hercules and Genesis programs. Because the Star Runner is designed as a smaller version of the Hercules in many ways, it's designed as a cargo vessel, but it has a little bit more variety to it. It can be used as a smuggler, as a, as I should say, as a blockade runner, or as a information transport, an information ship, info runner, and so on and so forth. Its main purpose seems to be kind of getting into that medium to large range cargo ship, but it still has many of the same values that you see with Crusader. As I said, it's a smuggler, but that is more of a tangential purpose. Being able to smuggle things into locations isn't necessarily an illegal thing. Sometimes you need to get past security to deliver needed supplies to areas that are remote. That kind of argument. Yeah, that's the Star Runner. It's the most famous Star Runner probably right now. Belligerent Duck. I remember her name is Alex, but I know screw up her other name. Alexandria Dugan. There we go. I'll probably cut that back a little bit. Alexandria Dugan, who's the captain of the Belligerent Duck with Maz Hulan, are the main crew members aboard the Belligerent Duck, which is probably one of the most wanted vessels in the UEE right now, doing things like smuggling and heists and such with it. And there's an entire short story done for the promotion of this ship about Alex Dugan and her partner and a new partner that she finds, old new partner kind of thing. So yeah, that's the Mercury Star Runner. You got the Star Runner, Star Runner here, and then there's another version over here with a different skin, I believe, but the same ones. Now let's move on to MISC and talk a little bit about Musashi Industrial Starflight Concern. All right, we're here at the MISC wing of ILW 2951. Now, MISC is an interesting company. I mentioned that at the end of the Measure era, there was a need for transports for ground vehicles. But what I didn't mention is that it wasn't just ground vehicles. Basically, every heavy lift transport, medium to heavy lift transport that was in existence has been fading out. Many of the companies that had been around during the end of the Measure era that built the heavy lift transports collapsed at the end of the Measure era because they had such close ties with the Measures. They ended up getting killed or run out, the companies collapsing. As a result, in the early new UEE period, in the early 29th century, there is this desperate need for heavy transports. Thus, you have companies like Crusader and MISC stepping into that role to help fill the gap, with MISC taking the lion's share of that change, though Drake would also come by and help as well in short order. So MISC was started as a merger between Hato Electronics Corporation and a branch of ACOM Limited called Musashi Lifestyle Design Unit. And they formed Musashi Industrial and Starflight Concern, headquartered on Saisei, the same planet where Tumbril's from. This company focused on industry. There's one exception, which is kind of an interesting story, but they are the main industry leaders of the UEE. They build most of the heavy lift ships. One of their ships, the Hull series, being the most common ship in not just human space, but in all of the universe. Hull series are everywhere. They're absolutely dirt common. And they're built by Musashi Industrial and Starflight Concern, or MISC. Now, the reason why that is because in 2910, well after MISC had gotten its start and became very, started getting the ball rolling, they had garnered the attention of the Xi'an Empire, which at the time was still somewhat hostile or distant to humanity. It would be another 20, 30 years before the Huxaw, the Human-Xi'an Trade Agreement, was actually signed to open up more Xi'an and human cross-selling and, tech trade. So, quietly, the Xi'an approached MISC, and MISC sat down with them and banged out a Lend-Lease agreement for tech for both of these ships. You see, the Xi'an love the Hull series. The Hull series of ships were very, very popular amongst haulers and amongst logisticians, I guess, in the Xi'an Empire. So the agreement essentially said that the Xi'an would give some tech and limited aid to MISC. In return, MISC would give them the plans to build their own hull series for Xi'an use. So they could rebuild the seats for the whatever they, to fit the Xi'an bodies, to kind of modify the whole series to be more Xi'an. And this agreement did very well and would eventually lead to two specific, probably iconic ships for the for MISC, which was the Freelancer and the Reliant. But first, let's look at the oldest ship from MISC, and we'll work our way backwards. This is the Starfarer. Now, the Starfarer is one of the earliest ships that MISC developed, specifically to fill in that heavy lift role, though it would eventually be supplanted by the whole series. The Starfarer's job was to be a configurable fuel ship to allow for refueling and, well, mostly just refueling, but also to refine fuel in situ. It was the result of long studies into just the lack of infrastructure that still remained in much of the UEE, especially after the fall of the Mezzers. So the Starfarer was built to fill this role. It's still not quite as popular as the other ships that had come by, but it was still enough popular that it caught the attention of the new UEE Navy, who needed a refueling ship. But the problem was, MISC didn't know how to make military ships. They still really don't. They're not designed as military manufacturer. So, in a strange move, they actually turned to the disgraced Aegis Dynamics and said, help us make this? And Aegis said, yeah, sure. As a result, we have the Starfarer Gemini. What is this? Gemini, right? Yeah, Gemini. I always get, there's so many G's in this one. So, in this game, the Starfarer Gemini swaps out some of the fuel plants and other things for bigger guns, torpedoes, or these might just, I think these are just missiles, and designed to, and a little bit more armor to kind of designed to protect it in combat. The idea being that it could be close to the front lines to refuel not just fighters, but larger ships as well. Because it's in the back here, you'll see, there are 6 tanks in the front, 3 on each side, and the last tank in the back is actually a refinery. So these are actually refinery pods to help take in gases from the atmospheres, especially the atmospheres of gas giants, and refine them into hydrogen fuel to then store and distribute later. Now, from there, we have the creation of the, actually, yeah, it's the Freelancer. No, it's not the Freelancer. Check my notes again. Yeah, it's actually, it is a Freelancer, yeah. So we have the creation of the Freelancer. It's about the same time. We have the creation of the Freelancer. Now, the Freelancer is part of that exchange from the Xi'an to MISC. This uses some tech from the Xi'an, especially when it comes to its thrusters and its main engines. Originally, in the design, those engines tilted, but the CIG has kind of changed that now. But the Freelancer was built to fill in, again, that industry gap for independent haulers. It was designed as an independent hauling ship for short to medium range to be as small as possible. The original Freelancer was designed to fit in the smallest possible jump points that humanity had discovered, meaning it is a huge ship for what it can carry, and for its range it becomes very, very dynamic. Over time, pilots realized how good these Freelancers are and how easy they are to modify. So they began to modify them for long-range hauling, but also for exploration and some light combat craft. MISC saw this, worked with them, and then built other variants specifically from the manufacturer of the Freelancer, including the DUR, the MISC, and the MAX. This in front of us is the Freelancer MISC. It says that because it cut out the back over here. You see that little area open up. It cut out the back and replaced some of the cargo space with missiles, big honking missiles. So this is designed with more of a combat use, especially kind of like a cheap missile boat to be used alongside other Freelancers as sort of a Q ship or a not necessarily, you don't necessarily notice that it's what it is until it's too late. And it's often used in the merchant navies as an escort vessel as well as a patrol vessel or a cargo vessel. Now, alongside the Freelancer, we have Ship B. Not even kidding you. This is called Ship B. Now, during this technology exchange, there was a lot of ideas being thrown out there. A lot of the designers and engineers at MISC were really excited because they had their hands on tech that no human had ever seen outside of the military. And they wanted to see what they could do with it, play with it. So what eventually came out of that was the Freelancer. But the second thing that kept going under reevaluation, redesign, back and forth for almost 40 years was this, which was originally called just Ship B because it was the B-type ship from the Freelancer. The Freelancer was the primary, this was the secondary if the primary didn't work out. Eventually, it would get its own release, and this is the MISC Reliant, which heavily uses Xi'an technology. In fact, it converts, because most Xi'an ships actually fly vertical. While it's landed like this, it can actually, when it goes into spaceflight mode, will convert and move around to reconfigure itself, using some of the Xi'an tech when it comes to things like maneuvering thrusters and some of the other kind of vertical integration stuff. It isn't a hugely popular ship, but it does strike hard in the fact that it's very affordable. Many people enjoy it because it is a affordable, small, two-person ship that has, like the Freelancer, many variations that you can make it, including science, military, cargo, and so on. Now, the odd one out. Meet the industrial ship's version of a racer. Now, this has got another one of those interesting stories, so let's talk about it right here. CEO of MISC, named Corey Desmond, who was the CEO in 2833, one of the very first CEOs, wanted something away from what they'd been making. He wanted something better. Not better, faster. They envisioned a ship that would, like a racing ship, a championship racing ship, using the tech they had, which was insane, but it eventually would lead to the creation of Project Daedalus. Project Daedalus was a ship that was released in 2898, and it was raced on the New Horizons Speedway, it was raced before the New Horizons Speedway, but it was not good. It didn't work very well. But in later years, the end of the 29th and early 30th century, with the acquisition of Xi'an tech from that trade deal, they began to look at Project Daedalus a little bit differently, changing up some of the designs for the sleekness, these engines in the back, adding more thrusters, changing the configurations, using these sorts of different tech improvements from the Xi'an when it came to maneuverability, specifically stuff that was pioneered by APOA. And that ended up becoming the MISC Razor. Now, the MISC Razor was released in 2946, so a good 150 years, well, about 100, a little over 100 years since it was originally conceived by its great-great-grandfather at this point. But it was seen, much like the M50, as a possible replacement for the Avenger. There are some military forces that use these as covert infiltration ships, or covert protection or spy ships. But one MISC Razor won the premier Murray Cup in 2947, meaning that this ship, made by an industrial manufacturer, has won the biggest race in the universe. Nuts, right? Yeah, so the military does use this for Black Ops. I don't know exactly what they do for Black Ops, but I'm assuming it's something like spying or dropping off agents or exfiltrating agents if need be, because of how small it is and the stealth coating that the military has applied to it. So that's all the ships of MISC that are on the floor. Let's go look at some of the holographic ships, which are in the universe but not quite in the game yet. Join us. Here we are at the holographic display portion of the floor. Now let's take a look at this. Here we have the latest offering from Tumbril. This is the Ranger. The Ranger is a two-wheeled motorcycle, a throwback to very old days. Now, the Ranger is designed as a light reconnaissance vehicle for military, for civilian purposes, and for racing. The military does use Razors as a scout vehicle, but it is still very new. The Rangers are the brand new vehicle from Tumbril. So we still haven't seen the full amount of them, but they are still fairly well liked by many civilians, including several motorcycle gangs that do exist in the verse, riding clubs, who use the Rangers quite extensively. Then lastly, we have the A-10 in space, the Crusader Ares. Now, the Ares is interesting because the Ares is developed very recently. It's one of the most recent ships from Crusader, but it's not really a Crusader ship. It's a bearing weapons platform. Bearing Applied Designs, I think is that what it said. Bearing Applied Technology, BAT. Bearing Applied Technology is a weapons manufacturer from Terra, and they were looking for a ship to build around their brand new, what is it called? SF7 series of weapons, which is this specific type of size 7 weapon, which is designed to be a little bit tougher, a little bit more damaging than others. So they approached Crusader, and the result is the Ares. Now, there's two versions of the Ares, the Inferno and the Ion. The Ion uses an an energy version, whereas the Inferno uses a Gatling version. So this is still being under works, but it's definitely designed for capital ship killing and ground vehicle support. And that's it for the floor for Crusader Industries, MISC, and Tumbril Day. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Tell me what you think in the below. Any of these ships your favorite ships? You want to hear more from MISC? Let me know. And as always, remember, Ex Historia and Astra.